It's not turning your face a different shade than your body. Natural shadow. We, as pales, it's just a bit more complicated to change the undertone. I skip bronzer. No one's gonna use that. Yes, we will. The most deceivingly hard part. Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel, or hi, welcome if you're new here. I assume if you've clicked on this video, you, like me, also share foundation shades with Casper. Sometimes doing your makeup when you're very pale can be deceivingly challenging with either finding shades that work or techniques that work, because what is often, trendy on social media, whether that be product or technique, they don't always work when you have very, very fair skin. But that is what I'm here for. I have made all of the mistakes, so that way hopefully you do not have to. So these are some of my best tips. We're gonna go step by step through all the steps of doing my makeup, and I'm gonna share with you my best products and my best tips for doing makeup when you are very, very fair. So hopefully these all help you out, and without further ado, let's just get right into it. So let's start with foundation, and I somehow, by the grace of God, have a foundation that matches me today, but if I didn't, these are my tips. A lot of times, brands just don't make foundation shades that go light enough or go light enough with the correct undertone, because for some reason, they'll make all of the ultra fair shades either neutral or all of them cool or all of them warm, which just that's never made sense to me. I'm using the NYX Buttermelt Glaze Skin Tint in the shade 1 Whipped Butta, by the way. A lot of times you'll see people say, oh, you can just mix the undertone. You can just add in a pink or a blue or a yellow corrector, whatever it is, to make that lightest shade that matches you shade-wise into your correct undertone. Personally, I find that a bit difficult. That takes a lot of color theory, some color mixing. It's just a bit more complicated to change the undertone than it is to change the shade. So what I would recommend is a white mixer. LA Girl is the brand to go to for this. It's drugstore. They have their foundation mixing Pigment, which is just a large bottle of foundation, and then also their Pro Concealer comes in just a flat white as well. That way you can just buy the lightest shade that the brand has in a formula that you really love, that is your correct undertone, whether that be in the light category and you are very, very fair. You don't have to get something, let's say you have a cool undertone like I do, you don't have to buy that lightest shade with a neutral or a warm undertone and then try and mix pinks and blues into it to get it to match you. Instead, you can just buy the lightest shade that has a cool undertone and then just mix in a little bit of white, mix it all together, test it, and just until it matches. It is so much less stressful than trying to find something that is going to match you perfectly. Now moving into concealer. Concealer, oftentimes you'll see people use a shade that's a hair lighter than their foundation shade, so that way they can brighten down that center of the face and bring it forward. However, when you are the lightest shade of everything already and that is your shade match, we as pales don't actually need to use a separate concealer to get that brightening effect on our face. So instead what you can do is just take that exact same foundation that you used over your entire face and just bring that under the eyes as well. Unless you really need a different coverage level or finish than your foundation, just bring whatever you used all over the face up under your eyes. You don't need a separate concealer to brighten because your skin tone is already bright. And then so instead of bringing things forward, because we are already forward, we are going to bring things back with bronzer, blush, contour. That is going to be our way of doing that. So now let's talk about contour. Contour across the board is supposed to be cool toned. Contour is supposed to mimic those natural shadows. So you'll see if I natural shadow under my eyes, a natural shadow. And those shadows tend to lean more gray. They are cool toned to give depth to the face, to shape. But for some reason, a lot of brands will make their contours more neutral in tone rather than truly cool toned. Because for people who have a neutral undertone or even a warm undertone, or maybe have a slight tan in that kind of light to medium tan shade range, contours can be a lot more forgiving in that kind of middle range. And so brands will do that to make it sort of a bronzer moment, which is when you use something that's a little bit warmer in tone to bronze the face and shape contour. At the same time, it is not as intense as a true contour, but for some reason, brands do that. And when we get to bronzer, I will explain why that is not really possible on fair skin. So especially if you are very fair with a cool undertone, it is extremely hard to find true contours. My favorite one is this one from the brand Rituel de Fille. This is their cream color pigment in the shade Intuition, and it is a nice blend of taupe, mauve, and gray. So it's very cool toned and has a hint of a purple in there to keep it very, very cool even once blended out. Because a lot of times something will look cool tone when you swatch it, then once you blend it out, that kind of warmth will come through, which defeats the purpose of a contour. So this having that purple in there and that gray really helps it to stay cool toned and remain a shadow. Sephora collection contour sticks are also really great. I don't currently have that one with me, but I will put a picture right here. Those ones are really, really great too. Truly, truly cool toned. And so I'm just gonna take that on a little brush, do a little tap, tap, tap. And then I'm gonna tap some of that excess off because less is always more, especially when it comes to very fair skin, because our skin has less pigment to it. So our skin needs less pigment in our cosmetics, in our makeup, to have the same effect that it would when you apply more product on someone with a tanner or deeper skin tone. It is quite easy to go overboard on fair skin, because especially when we see other girls doing their makeup, they'll just swirl their brush in and then go straight on the face, and it's just like no big deal to them because their face can take more color because their skin has more color. Our skin has practically no color, therefore we don't need as much product, as much color to get the effect that we are going for. So always, always, always start with like barely enough that you think it's not even gonna show up. Start with that and then build very, very slowly to get the color that you want. Even if you want a stronger pigment, I would start with less. I mean, this goes for everyone, but it is especially important on pale skin. You saw how much I applied, not that much, and we already have a very strong contour on the face. Now, setting powder is a nightmare. Our best bet is going to be a colorless powder. These typically look just completely white and they do not translate with any color on the face whatsoever. Any skin tone can use them. They are just completely clear, transparent, not translucent. We will get into that in a second. But if you are like me and you have bought setting powders and they turned out to be too dark for you, you can still use them. What I would recommend is pick them up and then set the areas of your face that you're gonna end up putting bronzer over top, so that way you can still get use out of them, but that depth, that warm tone, or that just too deep of a shade isn't going to affect how your makeup looks overall, because you're just setting specific parts of the face where you're gonna end up putting depth anyway. So that is a really great hack, just to make sure that you can still use your makeup and, you know, it's not a waste, it's not gonna expire, it's not gonna get thrown out. You can still use products that are not your shade match, you just have to get a little bit creative. Now going back to what I said about translucent powders. Translucent does not mean transparent. Translucent powders typically still have pigment added to them to prevent any sort of flashback. It is usually too dark on very fair skin. Something like the Laura Mercier translucent setting powder is just too dark. Even though it's not technically supposed to have any sort of coverage, any sort of color to it, because it is translucent, there is that slight hint of color. So I have two setting powders that I'm gonna just show you the difference between. These are both the lightest shade that say that they're for very light skin, but this is the About Face powder, and you can hopefully see just from in there, this is the lightest shade, but it is just like yellow. So this may work if you have a very warm undertone. However, it does not work for my skin tone because I have a cooler undertone. And that was the shade Bow, by the way, in the About Face. And now we have the Makeup by Mario setting powder. This is in the shade Fair Pink, which hopefully you can see there, has a slight pinky hue to it. So it's much more flattering on my skin tone, and it is quite light as well. So unfortunately, this is going to take some trial and error with setting powders, but I would look for something that when you swatch it on your hand, either you can't see it at all or it is a little bit brightening. Because especially when put over a wet foundation, a lot of powders tend to oxidize a little bit and run a little bit deeper on the face when you are very fair. So I'm going to set my entire face with the Makeup by Mario powder and under my eyes, because again, I am as white as snow. You don't need a separate under eye kind of brightening setting powder. I know some people do go in with multiple, but you don't need a brightening one because that is just the shade of your face. Now let's talk about blush. And blush is probably one of the most fun parts of doing makeup when you're fair, is because you can use basically any blush that you want. You can use the lightest light to like a very deep color. You can use pretty much any blush. Because the thing about blush is if you find a shade that you like or a color that suits you or an undertone that you really enjoy, you can buy whatever depth of color, and the deeper that you get, you just have to use less of that color. Like we said with the contour, our skin can't handle that much pigment. Unless you want a lot of pigment, go for it. Who am I to say anything? Wear what you feel happy in. If you like a bold cheek, wear a bold cheek. And you can absolutely wear a bold cheek as someone with very fair skin. What I'm suggesting is just start little by little and work your way up to the level of pigment that you want. And one of the biggest tips that I can give you is start with as little as possible and then let it sit. Do not add more immediately. Do not blend some away if you think you've over applied. Just let it sit, give it 2-3 minutes, because I'm gonna show you this brush has nothing on it, but I'm gonna show you what happens when I start bouncing the brush on my cheek as if I am applying a blush. You can see I have a flush. There is color. It brought redness to the skin because you're tapping your skin. You're effectively punching yourself in the face with a brush. And so that is going to stimulate blood flow to that area. So when you're applying blush, tap, 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 you're seeing that blush go on your skin, but you're also seeing the blood flow to that area a little bit. So let it sit, let it settle, let that blood flow kind of settle back into your body, and then go in with the blush. You can see it's settled by now. Now I can go back in with my brush, go back in with your blush. And if you are cool toned, one of the best tips that I can give you is to get a purple blush. This one you can't find anymore, I'm so sorry, but there are a ton of purple blushes on the market. I'm working on a video doing every single purple blush on fair skin. Just take a nice purple, because purples on fair, cool toned skin will translate pink. I'm sure if you're here, you had the experience where you grab a pink blush because you think it's super pretty, put it on, and it's orange. So when you use something purple, it is going to translate more pink on your skin, which is what I am personally going for. So applying it little by little, just going in with a little bit at a time, and then building it up to the color that I want, because especially if I'm going in with a deeper shade or a more pigmented formula, it is very easy to go overboard on the blush. But I am always going to be a champion of being in control of your makeup and having the ability to build up rather than applying too much and being like, crap, now I can't blend it out as well as I want to, or now it's getting patchy, or this, that, or the other thing. And very pale skin is just not as forgiving when it comes to color as other skin tones. So if you apply too much product all at once and can't blend it out, it is going to be more noticeable than on someone with maybe a tanner or a deeper skin tone. So a lot of this waiting little by little, building it up, is just to avoid mistakes that are going to be more noticeable on our skin tone. Now we have finally made it to bronzer, which is what I'm sure a lot of you guys came here for. And I'm gonna be completely honest, most days I skip bronzer because a lot of brands just don't make bronzer shades that go light enough for very fair skin. The lightest shade is always some weird shade of orange, and there's nothing lighter than that or more cool toned than that. But my favorite brand for bronzers is Dibs. I find that they have very unique undertones and very light and buildable sheer formulas. This is their Desert Island Duo Stick, and this is the shade 1.5. because this shade just has a more red undertone. As you can see, it's not orange, it's red, which really helps on fair skin, because one of the other tips that I'm going to talk about in a second has to do with blush, and pink tones are just a little bit more flattering on fair skin rather than an orange that other traditional bronzers are going to put on our face. So having this red undertone, you can see the formula shears out really, really nice. So it's extremely buildable, very light. The undertone is quite unique, which is something that I look for and I really love about that specific shade 1.5. And then this is their Duet Baked Bronzer in the shade Vanilla Latte, which I'm gonna swatch. This shade right here is so light. Let me get a little bit more so you can see. So light, so fair. You can like maybe just see a hair of a difference in the warmth on my hand, just right there. But that's what we want. That is why it is so good. And then if you want a little bit more depth, there is that more marbled side, so you can absolutely build up that color a little bit more. Something like this. Brands don't make something like this. I don't know if they just think it's not gonna be effective. They're like, it barely shows up, no one's gonna use that. Yes, we will. Yes, we will. So it's extremely sheer, extremely light in tone. I'm obsessed with that. I will show you how it looks on the face. Also, it's a neutral undertone, which I love because it's not pulling straight orange, but you can just see, tap it on. Very, very light. The effect is not strong, but it's just warming up the cheek a little bit. Just a little. And if you want it a little bit deeper, you can go in with this deeper side over here, or it's just a buildable formula as well. So you can really just take your time, add a little bit of warmth, and it's just gonna add that dimension to your face without looking like you smeared orange all over yourself. It's not turning your face a different shade than your body, because a lot of times bronzers are not flattering on fair skin because they're just too strong, too stark of a difference in the natural tones that are present in our skin. So it kind of makes our face look like a completely different shade than the rest of our body, and it just doesn't look cohesive, which if that's the look you're going for, if you don't want it to look natural, hell yeah, my guy, go for it. This shade is really nice for just that little, oh, she has a little bit of warmth added to her skin. Oh, there's a little bit of dimension going on in tones that are present in my skin. So if you are very fair and you struggle to find a bronzer, this is the #1 that I would recommend. The Dibs Duet Baked Bronzer Duo in the shade Vanilla Latte. Cannot recommend this enough. When you look at my face after I've applied it, you can't really see the bronzer, but you can see the effect from the bronzer, which is what I love so much. Same thing with how lightly we applied the contour. You can't see the contour. There's not any lines on the face. You can't see the bronzer, but you can see the effect that the bronzer has had on my skin. And another really great hack that I love is to use some sort of a blush, like a nudie beige blush as your bronzer. This is oftentimes called a bronzer. This is my favorite one. This is Tarte in the shade Seduce. This is just their blush. It's just kind of this nude beige with that pinkiness behind it, and it's not too warm either. It's not pulling orange, because fair skin, when we go out in the sun, when we get back inside, when we have sort of that like golden glow flush, we don't actually turn into that golden tan kind of color. Our skin oftentimes turns a little bit red, a little bit pink, so using a bronzer is also very flattering. And when all else fails, if you genuinely just can't find something that looks flattering on you, whether that be a bronzer, everything is too dark for you, or a blush, you can't find a tone that you like, if you have a setting powder that you love, 2 shades up, find something with your correct undertone. MAC is really great for this. MAC has literally every color of everything you will ever need. Just find a MAC face powder in a shade that is going to work for you. Grab something that works for you, start lightly, and then build it up to the level in which you want. I want to keep it like this, so I'm just not going to add any more. And if one of you could actually explain to me why lips is actually the most deceivingly hard part of finding makeup when you are very fair, and this is whether you have cool, neutral, or warm undertones. I feel like the biggest conversation that I see happening online between us is like, what lipstick are you wearing? What lipstick is not going to turn orange? What lipstick is not going to turn gray? Because they all do. They either turn one or the other. It's either orange or gray, and nothing will actually stay that kind of nude pink color. If you have tried Charlotte Tilbury Pillow Talk, hold on. Like, it's my worst nightmare is this lipstick. Like, that's ew, but it looks gorgeous on everyone else. And so my biggest tip is to go for bolder lip colors, because these are not as risky as something like a nude when it comes to undertone or how it's going to show up. This red that you see in the tube, this is what you're gonna get on the lips. This berry that you see in the tube, this is what you're gonna get on the lips. There's less guesswork going into picking a shade, because what you see when a color is very saturated and very bold is what you are going to get. And take this berry shade, you see berry, and you get berry. So it really takes that guesswork out when you go in with a bold lip. However, if you are really set on a nude lip, which, like, I get it, I am also on the hunt for a perfect nude lip, best tip, trick, technique that I can give you is walk up to the shelf at the store, look at the lipsticks, pick the most boring shade, the stupidest little lipstick shade that you would think, this is gonna be so ugly, this is so pale, no one wants this, this is disgusting of a shade, it's collecting dust on the shelf, no one wants to touch it, it's gonna be beautiful. Like, let's take this shade, it's a little bit peachy, but this is Urban Decay Oat Milk, and it is nude. And you can sheer this out with lip balm or build it up. I have a little bit of lip balm on right now, so it's not as pigmented, but it's just a beige nude. And the little bit of pink from my lips is coming through to mix with it, which is kind of flattering when you have such a boring kind of like pinkless shade like this. Like in the tube, it looks like everyone's gonna ignore this. This is Lawless in the shade Wedding Day. And you can see, very boring, a lot of gray in here. This is it swatched, it's like a pinky gray. And then you can see it's still a little bit too gray for what I like, but you just take something like a hot pink gloss, and this is another thing, like, be your own little makeup chemist, have a little bit of fun, tap that over top. And it really amplifies that pink from the lipstick. Mix and match, make your own shades. When it comes to nudes, it's a lot more difficult, so I would recommend taking something like super ultra boring like this, and then pop a little bit of something really bright over top. I still have a nude lip, but it's just color corrected to be a little bit more pink. And that is all of my best tips and tricks and products and techniques for being very fair and trying to have your makeup look the best that it can. If you have any other tips, tricks, products, techniques, please put them down below, because as a fellow pale, I am also always looking for things to help my makeup process go a little bit more smoothly. And I hope that you at least found one thing that I talked about in this video to be helpful with your journey. I understand, as a fellow pale, sometimes finding the right products or the right techniques or the things that everyone else is using just don't necessarily work for us. And I learned that lesson the hard way. Hopefully now you can learn it the easy way. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you being here, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.